in yet another legal blow to Donald Trump, he loses his challenge to the gag order in his New York civil fraud trial, where the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, is trying to run him and his kids and his businesses out of New York so that they can never do business here again and disgorge hundreds of millions of dollars in ill-gotten profits from him and his company. And that's been going on now for a couple of months in New York State Supreme Court. And don't forget, in New York, our Supreme Court is actually our lowest court. It's our entry-level court, but we call it Supreme Court. And it's in civil court, and it's in front of Judge Arthur Engoron, and it's been brought by Attorney General Letitia James. She's an elected New York State Attorney General, has nothing to do with Joe Biden, even though Donald Trump likes to say that. This is just a New York State Attorney General, and independently elected by the people of the state of New York. And she charged him with a civil offense called it's Executive Law 6312, which essentially means he engaged in persistent fraud. And as a result, it gives her jurisdiction to go after him on behalf of the people of the state of New York. It's a great statute that is very unique to New York. And in the course of this trial that has been going on now for many, many weeks, where they put on the government put on a case. The defense actually put on, I think, a 4-week long defense. And there's a very short rebuttal from the government. And the case is now adjourned for closing arguments that are supposed to happen in about a month and briefing. And then the judge will render a verdict, because don't forget, this is a bench trial or a judge trial. There is no jury. And the judge, this was, I think, 6 or 7 counts, I believe 7, and there's 6 remaining. And the very first count required the judge to just find persistent fraud, which he did. He found, as a matter of law, with all the facts that were developed through discovery and through all the pleadings, that there was enough that to prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that there was persistent fraud. Now, so they've already been found liable. And so this trial has been about 2 things: the remaining 6 counts, which have an added element of basically you have to prove the elements of a crime, whether it's insurance fraud or business fraud or conspiracy. There's these criminal elements to the persistent fraud. So it's like persistent fraud plus something else. And it requires the government to show intent, that it was intentional and that it was material, meaning that people relied, like the banks relied on these false documents, that they intentionally falsified the documents, and that it was relied upon by the institutions who utilized the statements of financial condition that had all of the wrong and lie information on there, like the size of the apartment and whether or not a building was occupied or rent controlled, et cetera. It's been all over the news, and everybody knows all the lies that are in there. And the one place that Donald Trump's defense, I think, may have gained some ground is when they had several Deutsche Bank employees or former employees testify that we didn't rely on these documents. They weren't material. And so I think that might, we would have loaned money to him anyway. He was a whale, which I guess means, a big client. And so we wanted his business. And so no harm, no foul. That's been Trump's defense all along. But it doesn't matter. You're still not allowed to lie in New York on your business records in order to do business in New York. And then it is clear that he gained all sorts of advantages, loans in favorable terms, insurance, et cetera, that he wouldn't have gotten had there not been this these lies and this, this information that was objectively false on these statements of financial condition. So I think they're going to prove some of the charges. I think Judge Engoron might throw him a bone, as they say, and not find on some of the charges. I think that will actually protect Judge Engoron on appeal, because Judge Engoron has been mercilessly attacked by Trump and his lawyers, accusing him of being biased, which he is not. And and Trump has been so frustrated that he started attacking not just the judge, but his law clerk, his principal law clerk, who works closely with the judge, like almost every other judge in the state of New York. So it's very common. Everybody has law clerks. And for Trump and his lawyers to go after this law clerk is really outrageous. And as a result, Engoron issued a gag order on Trump in October. And then his lawyers went after her. And then he had to issue another one in November against the lawyers. And it was a very limited gag order saying, basically, you just can't go after and talk about my staff. And Trump took the unusual step, and this is where he lost big time in the Appellate Division First Department, which is the New York State interim court, where they hear the appeals before it goes to the highest court in New York, which is called the Court of Appeals, not the Supreme Court. And essentially, the First Department basically rejected it, and it basically rejected his bid to overturn the gag order, which is moot anyway because the trial's basically over. But regardless, what they said was two things. Number one, Trump and your lawyers who don't do business in New York, you used the wrong mechanism to appeal this. You sued the judge personally, and that's not how you go about doing this. And so for the technical reason that you don't know what you're doing and you used the wrong procedure, we're going to reject it. But by the way, by using that wrong procedure and by suing Judge Engoron personally, Judge Engoron had to get a lawyer. And his lawyer is this lawyer in New York named David Nocenti, who I am familiar with and certainly familiar with his reputation. He's like a lawyer's lawyer. He's like one of the smartest attorneys there is. He's phenomenal. He's not political. He's just straight down the middle, really, really smart and kind person. Couldn't have a better lawyer. Anyway, he represented Judge Engoron and submitted their response on his behalf. And in it, they put together it was like, 100 plus or 200 plus page, single space, typewritten of all the threats it was a transcription of all the threats that Judge Engoron's staff have received as a result of Trump's attacks. And they were just heinous and disgusting and horrible. And so the First Department, the appellate court said, they rejected the bid to overturn the gag order and said that the gravity of the harm to Trump is very small, given that the gag order is so narrow and so limited and only prohibits him from making statements about the court staff. He's been, gagged, like I said, since October. He's violated it twice. He's been fined twice. And the 5 judges who heard this said that Article 78, which is the mechanism that they used to appeal this, was, as I said, the wrong mechanism. And they essentially said that, you're not doing this the right way. You don't do this the way you did it. And so therefore we find that this remedy you're asking us to do, this extraordinary remedy of a writ of prohibition, which is what I guess they tried to do, lies only where the clear legal right to such relief exists. And permitting, and then they cite to a case. And he basically said, permitting the liberal use of this remedy would effectively achieve premature appellate review and undermine the statutory and constitutional regime governing the appellate process. This remedy is only appropriate if there exists a substantial claim of an absence of jurisdiction or an act of excess jurisdiction. And so they basically go on to analyze that. And they said, look, in determining whether to exercise the court's discretion and grant this writ of prohibition that they filed, you have to look at the gravity of the harm caused by an excess of power and whether the excess of power can be adequately corrected on appeal or by other ordinary proceedings at law or in equity. And they go on to rule here the gravity of the harm is small since it is narrow and limited just to the staff. They also cite to Judge Chutkan's gag order decision that the DC Circuit that upheld Judge Chutkan's gag order and indicated that that was upheld recently, I think last week or this week even, and that's even broader than this particular one. And so, they said while gag and contempt orders were not issued pursuant to formal motion practice, they're reviewable through the ordinary appellate process. For these reasons, a writ of prohibition is not the proper vehicle for challenging the gag order and the contempt order. And I know sounds really, arcane and what are all these things, but it's just interesting to teach everybody New York law. And they basically said, look, Article 78 review is not permitted in a civil or criminal action where it can be reviewed by other means unless it's an order summarily punishing a contempt committed in the presence of the court. And the contempt orders here were not issued summarily, nor were the contempt committed in the presence of the court. To the extent that there may have been appealable issues with respect to any of the procedures the court implemented in imposing the financial sanctions, the proper method of review would be to move to vacate the contempt orders and then to take an appeal from the denial of the motion. So, if you're scratching your head going, I don't even know what's happening and what you're saying, don't worry. I really don't know either. I'm just reading from the decision. I practice law in New York, but I'm new to the world of civil law. I did criminal law for a long time. So I'm just reading to you. I understand what they're saying, but it's very much essentially what they're saying is they used the wrong vehicle to appeal this decision. And therefore, you lose once again, Donald Trump. So he is still gagged in New York and he still can't talk about the law secretary and the New York Appellate courts. He lost in the New York Appellate Court again. I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo with Legal AF. Join me and my co-hosts every Wednesday and Saturday.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.